Okay, I was a monster on the football field growing up when I was 9. But like for real, I was one of probably 2 players in our whole league of 8 through 12-year-olds that was already over 5 feet tall. I weighed over 130 pounds. I was like 5'3" by the time I was 10. I played on the defensive line, I played quarterback, and sometimes I played wide receiver. And I was usually voted as the MVP of my team at the end of the year trophy awards ceremony at the local Chuck E. Cheese. So I'm doing the right things, you know what I mean? Then when I got to 8th grade, I made it to my 8th grade team and we went undefeated, but I barely played. But you know, I was committed. I was going to workouts 2-a-days in the summer, and then I made the JV team. And I was placed in the depth chart as the nose tackle. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the job of some huge dude to just like get off the line quick, plug in run lanes so that your other linemen and linebackers can commit to making tackles. But I never played. Actually, I'll never forget this. I played 2 whole plays during that whole season. I was second string to this guy named Ben, who at 9th grade was being scouted by the University of Tennessee Volunteers, which is an SEC school, in 9th grade. It's insane. He was so good. At this point, I sort of made a business decision to stop playing organized football altogether. I was working so much. I was sacrificing so much, and really I wasn't getting the play time that I wanted. I also remember being in grade school, like maybe 4th grade, and my friend Nathan forgot his lunch one day and didn't have any money in his school account. So I gave him my lunch that day. And both of these stories involve some level of sacrifice. Now, when I say the word sacrifice, I can imagine many of you cringing inside because sacrifice means I'm not going to get what I want, right? But let me define sacrifice like this. To sacrifice something is you're choosing to take away from yourself to give to someone else. Notice that. If you're taking notes, notice that. This is huge. It isn't like not getting what you want, but rather you're choosing to take away from yourself. Like you aren't this middleman that's like taking from someone else to give to another. No, it comes from you. When you sacrifice for someone, it should affect you. Sacrificing is one of those concepts that gets a bit complicated in our world, I think. Because on one hand, like we have the amazing stories. The greatest of stories involve this great deal of sacrifice, are always awe-inspiring and encouraging. But in our real worlds, these stories seem few and far between. I remember like one time in 6th grade, I was in band, but my family didn't have enough money for me to rent a trumpet for the year for my school. And so when my best friend heard about this, his family chose to rent a trumpet for me for that year. If you were at Mix of the Summer, you heard about this girl named Ruby who donated her 16th birthday party to help build a house in Nicaragua. Or if you know like athletes, like NFL players, NBA players, they make it into the league, they make it into the association. What is the first thing they do? They buy their mom a house. These stories are really great, but we live in a world where sacrifice has been ruthlessly targeted and driven out of our thoughts and actions through the media, ad agencies, politicians, sometimes even our own parents don't want us to have to sacrifice. They get us what we want when we want it. Because when you say the word sacrifice, you automatically think about not getting what you want. And I like getting what I want when I want it. Don't you? Don't you like getting what you want? I hate waiting for stuff. Seriously, Amazon 2-day delivery is slowly killing small businesses. It's dismantling small communities. It's ruining the patience of every American citizen under the age of 50. You know what I mean? I kind of don't care sometimes. Just a few months ago during the summer, I moved out of my townhome into a single family home that actually has more than 9 feet of grass. And so I have to cut that grass. And so I have to buy a lawnmower. And the store didn't have the mower that I spent days researching for. And I almost just bought the one that was there. And my friends were like, no, don't do it. Wait, just order it. It's going to be here in 2 weeks. It's going to be fine. Thank God I have patient friends. But let me ask you this question. When was the last time you sacrificed for someone else? Like truly. Like it affected you. Like it made you miss out on something. That's kind of my point for today is we see sacrifice as a flaw. We don't want to have to sacrifice. We don't want to give anything up. We want what we want. But if you remember, this series is all about the unstoppable force that God's church is designed to be. And if we're going to truly be unstoppably good by God's standard, sacrifice is a key way to learn about the fullness of God and his plan that he has for us and to truly become unstoppably good forces in this world. But in order for me to talk about sacrifice with you today, I need to talk about stones. Come check this out. See, when God's ancient people worshiped him, they would come to the temple and bring them sacrifices, usually animals, food, to offer God for the relief of different things. This is actually pretty common in all ancient civilizations. You probably have heard of like the Greeks and the Mayans, the Native Americans who are on this continent, the Egyptians, all those. And the same was true for Israel. Now, the temple here, right? Temple is very important to this conversation. Folks would travel from all over the ancient world to visit the temple to worship God. Like imagine like if you worship God and there's only one church and it was in Texas and you only had like a donkey or a camel, and so like you just gather all of your stuff, your family, you load it on the camel, you walk, you go there once a year, you'd sacrifice, you head to Texas. But for these ancient people, you only found God at the temple. This is kind of the way their minds worked. It's how they saw it. If you were searching for God, you had to go to God. But with Jesus, which real quick, Son of God, came to die, raised to life again, offer you a way to God. That Jesus said there was a day coming where you don't need to go to the temple to worship. You only had to worship in spirit and in truth where you are. And in our passage today, our writer is talking about this very thing. So if you have a Bible, or if you have the Bible app on your phone, turn to 1 Peter chapter 2. I'm beginning in verse 4. Now, you are coming to Christ, who is the living cornerstone of God's temple. He was rejected by people, but he was chosen by God for great honor. And you are living stones that God is building into his spiritual temple. What's more, you are his holy priests through the mediation of Jesus Christ. You offer spiritual practices that please God. As the scriptures say, I am placing a cornerstone in Jerusalem, chosen for great honor, and anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. Okay, couple things to unpack. First, what he says, he starts off by saying that when we come to Jesus, when we come to know Jesus, when we trust and believe in Jesus, we are like living stones that God is building into his spiritual temple, which sort of means that we are a new kind of temple. We exist as a new temple. We exist as a sort of beacon for God's hope, the place where people can find and worship God. We are to kind of act like a temple in that way. And I take that to mean this: we are God's representatives. You no longer go and find God at the temple. You find God in God's people, in you, in me. If people want to see God, they need to look at us, which, side note, right? Don't you see where that sometimes can be problematic? Like there are many folks who say they are Christians and they certainly don't act like it. And they certainly don't believe the things that we think that God is for in this world. That causes problems. But what does this have to do with sacrifice? Well, let's revisit that text again, starting at verse 4. It says that you are coming to Christ, who is the living cornerstone of God's temple. Later, it says this. It says that he was rejected by people, but he was chosen for God for great honor. And as the scriptures say, I am placing a cornerstone in Jerusalem, chosen for great honor, and anyone who trusts in him will never be disgraced. So here I am in front of some stones, and the stones represent the temple, yes, but they also represent what we just read. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Most of you probably don't know what a cornerstone is. Well, let me show you. Back in the day, and even up until today, you built stuff with stone, and if you're building a foundation, your stone needs to be straight, level. In fact, if you're building a foundation, you'd always start with this one piece of stone that serves as your reference point. It's smooth, it's level, it's large. So that way, whenever you're building, you can kind of reference that place. That is the cornerstone. And as this metaphor goes, Jesus is the central reference point for God's love, for the way God desires us to live, for the way life was intended to be. But the people in that time rejected Jesus. They tried him, they sentenced him to death by crucifixion. And so here it is. Jesus sacrificed everything for us. And even though we threw him off to the side, God chose him to bring hope to this world. Jesus, though he was God and helped create everything on this earth, right, came down from heaven, taking the form of lesser man, was obedient to God's will, even through that horrible death. Jesus had the power to be this warrior type ruler, but he chose sacrifice. He chose rejection. He chose ridicule. He chose humility. And though we threw him off to the side for scrap stone, God used that stone. God used Jesus' death to build upon the new foundation of God's plan to restore the world. As it later says in verse 7, yes, you who trust and recognize the honor God has given him, but for those who reject him, the stone the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. While we threw Jesus to the side, God chose him to make everything right again with the world. And because Jesus made everything right for us, because he sacrificed, because he suffered, he died and rose, we too ought to sacrifice. We sacrifice because of Jesus' sacrifice. When you choose to sacrifice for someone else, you are placing importance on a few different things. You're choosing someone else's joy, happiness, satisfaction over your own. You are purposefully choosing to take away from yourself, whether that is your time or whether that's your money, your experience, your place of honor, your seat at the table, your place amongst the pack, so someone else can experience what you have. In fact, you, me, we would not be here in this space without countless numbers of sacrifices that happened on our behalf. And sometimes those sacrifices are small, and sometimes those sacrifices are big. Sometimes they don't really affect us, and other times they sting. But as followers of Jesus, our lives should be known by our sacrifice, to be known for our service, to be examples of grace. If we're indeed spiritual stones, if we're places where people see God at work, if we're going to be committed to that mission, then we need to follow through with the other half of this verse that says that we're the spiritual sacrifices of God. We sacrifice because of Jesus' sacrifice. And you might be wondering what in the world that actually means. Am I never going to have any fun again without feeling guilty? Do I ever get to spend my money on something that I feel like spending it on? Or I'm just so busy, I don't have time to really give to anybody. And I'm not saying that these questions are the wrong questions, but whatever questions are popping up into your mind, I think you probably need to check those in prayer and with your group. But what I can say, quite broadly speaking, is this. If you are a follower of Jesus, if you have chosen to align your life with the way of Jesus, if you believe what Jesus has done for you and are now on the journey with him, then your life needs to be lived as Jesus desires. And that is, we sacrifice because of Jesus' sacrifice. Life is no longer about what we want because we have a higher calling. We are part of an unstoppable, good force that's trying to change the very fabric of our time, that is trying to usher in great joy and purpose to the world. And it requires a huge amount of sacrifice from God's people. And this group of students in Maryland is going to sacrifice over the coming months to help build and establish a summer camp for students in Kenya. By your sacrifice, there are students who will experience summer camp for once in their life. And it's quite remarkable that the sacrifice of teenagers here in the US is going to change the lives of teenagers on a whole other continent. You know, there's a few years ago, a few students of mine met this guy, Caden, and Caden worked at a local camp. But he'd tell you that he really did not know the Lord. But while being at a counselor at camp, one of my boys, Joel, got to know Caden and felt this tug on his heart to invite Caden to move. So he called me up one night. He's like, bro, listen, this guy Caden, I want him to go to camp. Like, can the church pay for his spot? Like, it'd be so good. He needs to be there. And of course, we had scholarship money, but I just kind of turned the question back around to him. Well, what if you paid for him? That week, Joel and about a dozen other students and faculty and staff of the camp sacrificed money, like literal, like tens and tens of dollars, $20, $30, $40, $50. And they surprised Caden at the end of the week with a free spot to camp. And guess what happened? Caden got baptized. His life changed forever because a few students decided to sacrifice from canteen money to take their friend to camp. Oh, by the way, Caden is at our Mountain Road campus as one of our small group leaders. So quick shout out. Caden, you're great. Yeah, woohoo, you're great. So in your groups, think about the ways you could be sacrificing to make the world around you better. And listen, this doesn't need to be only a money thing, right? Your time matters. Your talents matter. All those ways you can sacrifice. You know, have you ever heard the expression, anything that is good in life is worth sacrificing for? You know, it may be a future spouse, kids, you know, being a part of athletics, the arts, music, being good at games, like being good or even great at any of these things requires some level of sacrifice and commitment. But still, all those things are temporary. God is forever. So do you want your lasting legacy to be lost in the world, or do you want to leave your mark in it? To do unstoppably good work in this life that lasts beyond you. That is what we desire for you at Mountain Students. We sacrifice because of Jesus' sacrifice. And we believe you all can change the world, one sacrifice at a time.